the governor's hunt. Would you also?
I've been fighting for that for years, and I will continue to fight for that.
Okay, the governor's office has been criticized for allowing no-bid contracts. Some states have been able to trim their funding by using bid management when it comes to contracts. Would you continue to allow no bids or eliminate them completely?
It's been a big part of our campaign to eliminate them completely with no exceptions. I like to look at the state of Indiana and Mitch Daniels, a Republican governor who in his first couple years did away with no bid contracts and literally saved tens of millions of dollars. It's been documented, the great success they had in Indiana. What happens right now is that there are a select few folks who get contracts, say law firms, that get contracts, and then the contributions come back to the administration to fund their campaigns, and it's just the kind of thing, again, you just can't make this stuff up, but it's legal to do in South Dakota. What we need to do is do away with no-bid contracts. We have a system called requests for proposals, but that's different from no-bid contracts.
Mr. Dugar, would you do away with no-bid contracts?
Not entirely, in the sense that I believe it's appropriate to have requests for proposals for qualitative things. If you're going to bid styrofoam cups or concrete with a certain number of sacks of cement per cubic yard, those things are quantitatively easily objectified, and you can set out in the specifics exactly what you want. But you can't when you're dealing with some professional services. You don't choose your brain surgeon based on the lowest bid. There are certain things like tourism services, legal services. I know Senator Heideprem's own firm has had at least $200,000 in no-bid contracts for legal services in the past. So he understands that there are certain areas where you want the quality of the service to be at a certain level before you'd consider hiring. In those instances, the law, since House Bill 1260 was passed just a few years ago, the law is that requests for proposals must be offered, and so essentially everyone who's interested in providing that service can offer their proposal to provide the service and what they would charge, and then you look and evaluate what's the right person to hire, what's the right firm to hire, who's the best firm to get the best bang for the buck.
You know, Angela, whenever we have this conversation, the Lieutenant Governor likes to bring up the fact that some of my partners had worked for the state. Well, if you think there's a problem with that, Lieutenant Governor, join me in preventing no-bid contracts. Let's be together on this and let's eliminate no-bid contracts. That would be the best thing for South Dakota. But there's another thing that he didn't mention. We proposed legislation in the last legislative session to eliminate the possibility of someone who gets over a certain amount in contracted services from the state from contributing to political campaigns. And that was a good idea. That's a good government idea. It's to end pay-to-play in the state of South Dakota, and that's really what we should do. I hope that you would join us in that.
Okay. Well, we are going to have to breeze by a couple of questions that we had planned here, but we'd like to know what makes you the most qualified to be the next governor of South Dakota?
I absolutely love this state, and I'm fascinated by it, and I'm fascinated by the challenges it faces. And you know, Susie and I have had this conversation a number of times. When you're laying on your deathbed, you don't want to look back and say, I wished I'd done something. I wished I'd tried harder to make a difference in my state, in the lives of the citizens of South Dakota. I don't want to be in that position. I want to do absolutely everything I can to put South Dakota on a platform for progress, and I know how to do that.
Actually, I was going to address this in my closing remarks, but let me offer what I think is important. I think South Dakotans should want 4 things in their next governor. They want someone who's honest. Now, I can tell you that I'm honest, but I know you're going to have to make that judgment for yourself. People should also want someone who's experienced. I have a unique mix of experience in agriculture. I grew up on the farm, working the fields, dealing with livestock. I spent 10 years in banking and 20 years running an organization, Children's Home Society. I have business experience. I also have political experience. 6 years as state senator, and now 8 years as lieutenant governor. I could hit the ground running. The third thing they want is leadership. A good leader offers specific proposals. I offered specific proposals in job creation in my jobs plan, in education in my education plan. But once those proposals are on the table, We want a governor who will listen, and I will be a good listener.
If you had one question you could ask each other, what is it? What would you like to ask each other?
Boy, what's been your most enjoyable experience on the campaign trail?
That's a good question, Dennis, and thank you for asking it. I think it's probably traveling every road throughout the state of South Dakota and meeting the fascinating people everywhere we go. I love the cultural celebrations. I love the Schmeckfest, and I love the powwows. I just think it's been a great, great experience all the way around. I think I would ask you, as someone who has the experience you just talked about, in both the legislature and lieutenant governor being the #2 position, and I'm now running for the office for 3 years, don't you feel like the people of South Dakota should have the right to hear from you about the cuts you would make in the budget?
Certainly, and as I have said, everything is on the table. I know Governor Rounds has asked each agency to offer at least 10%. I think that's a good approach because it requires each secretary to dig down into the programs with which they are most familiar, and rather than just cut everything 10%, say, gee, this program probably is not as important as that program, and suggest these as priorities to the governor and to the legislature. I think that's a responsible approach, and I want to hear what they have to say.
Okay, well, we will have a final word from each of the candidates when our KELOLAND TV South Dakota gubernatorial debate continues. Well, welcome back. We told you at the beginning of tonight's forum we're giving the candidates time for an opening and closing statement. They will each have a minute and a half to say their closing statements. And Scott Heideprem, we did a coin toss at the beginning, and you will go first for your closing statement.
Thank you again, Angela. I appreciate KELOLAND making time for us to come before you and talk about our vision for South Dakota. In the history of our state, you can see two distinct kinds of governors. You see a kind of governor who is more of a caretaker, who runs for the office to hold the office and to preside over the state of South Dakota. And then there's a kind of governor who is a strong leader. I believe that Dennis and I represent those two distinct styles. When you hear Dennis talk about how he'll be open about Valhalla, how he'll be open about airplanes, how he'll be open about economic development, how he'll be open about budget cuts, I really wonder where the substance is. I really wonder what he stands for and what the principles are that drive him to seek this incredibly important office. The second kind of style, the strong leader style, is clearly my approach. On each of those questions, I've told you carefully what I would do. Now, strong leaders make mistakes. I don't have all the answers, but I've got a lot of them. And I'm going to take this state in a clear direction. It's a direction that puts us on a platform for progress. You know, it's easy to be a popular governor. You go to ribbon cuttings, you kiss babies, you do the sort of popular things. It's hard to be a good one. I'll be that good one.
Okay, Mr. Dudar.
As I started to talk about earlier, I think you want 4 things in your governor. You want someone who's honest, and I mentioned, I know you'll have to look to your own judgment about that. You want someone with experience. I grew up on the farm, milking cows, attending a one-room country school. I know what it's like to work the fields, work with livestock. I understand agriculture, our #1 economic driver. I also have experience in business. I spent 10 years in banking, and in that role I led the new business effort for trust banking. As a new business leader, I know what it's like to go out and get the business for South Dakota, and I would be South Dakota's #1 salesman. I also led Children's Home Society economic security. I balanced their budget. I eliminated their debt. I built them 7-fold. I grew them to an organization with $17 million budget and 300 employees. I know what it's like to run a large organization, to freeze salaries when necessary, to cut programs, to seize opportunities. I could be a good leader in that area. You also want someone who's a leader, as I mentioned, who has specific proposals. And some say I don't, but I ask you, look at my economic development plan, look at my education plan. There are specifics there. Finally, you want someone who cares about people. I don't care about money, and I don't care about power. Those things don't motivate me. If I did, I would have never worked for 20 years for a children's charity. You don't get rich and powerful that way. But I do know I want to help people, and I can help South Dakota. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, both, for joining us tonight for our debate.